We are going to talk you through some of the common mental health difficulties that young people do face and give you some tools for how you can help support them to feel better, whether that be with their low mood, their anxiety or their self-esteem. In this webinar we talked about how it's important to understand emotions and the language that we use around these, and this carries on into this webinar when we're talking about mental health difficulties. There is a tendency to overdiagnose and use language which makes something seem to be more of a problem when actually it's just something that's very normal and something that we all experience. So this is what we're going to kind of investigate, look at some of the statistics around what's going on for young people, and then we're going to go through some of the most common mental health difficulties and what you can do about them in your daily practice. This also links back to the level 1 training when we talked about mental health being on a continuum and how no one is completely 100% mentally healthy, no one is 100% mentally unhealthy, and actually how we all move up and down. So bear that in mind as we go through the webinar. Before we get started with the webinar, we'd like you to complete an activity on page 9 in your booklet. So pause the webinar here and have a look at that activity. What we'd like you to do is try and fill in the blanks of the statistics for mental health difficulties for young people. So thinking about what your best guess would be for these statistics. And then when you've done that, press play on the webinar again and we'll give you the answers and see how close you were to getting them right.
Almost 1 in 4 young people and children show some evidence of mental ill health.
In 2021, NHS Digital found that rates of probable mental health disorders had increased since 2017. For 6 to 16-year-olds, it changed from a rate of 1 in 9 to a rate of 1 in 6. For 17 and 19-year-olds, it went from 1 in 10 in 2017, also to 1 in 6 in 2021. So there's some quite significant changes in just 4 years.
And if we look at the figures, there are around 850,000 children and young people with a diagnosable mental health disorder in the UK.
Half of all mental health problems manifest by the age of 14, so 50%. And by the age of 24, 75% of mental health problems have manifested.
Also, 1 in 3 mental health problems in adulthood are directly connected to an adverse childhood experience.
Pause the webinar here and take some time to complete the Recognising Mental Health Problems activity on page 10 in your workbook. Write on the gingerbread person what you would notice if you were considering whether a child or young person had a mental health difficulty. When considering if a child or young person has a mental health difficulty, it's firstly important to remember that we are not trying to diagnose the young person with any conditions. And Compass Go as a service moves away from clinical diagnosis such as depression and move more towards low mood. However, when it comes to common mental health difficulties, there are some early signs that you can be on the lookout for. When looking to see if a young person is suffering with their mental health, we would look for a change in behaviour. This can include mood changes, a lack of interest in hobbies, relationships becoming strained between them and their parents, them and their friends, or if they are older, with a significant other. A change in their academic performance, so they may start falling behind in subjects that they once did really well in. Avoidance of people or situations, so not exposing themselves to things that make them feel uncomfortable. And perhaps the onset of self-harm and substance misuse. Now, this list is not exhaustive, but these are just some of the things that we might be looking out for and some of the things you might have put on your gingerbread person. When a trained professional is trying to look for diagnosing a mental health difficulty, there are 5 things that they will consider. Now, we're going to give you these things so that you are aware of what they are, and we do revisit them again later on in webinar 4. But just to give you some kind of an idea as to what professionals will look for, the first thing we look for is the duration. So how long has this been going on for? A young person can feel low in mood for 2 weeks and then bounce back, or perhaps they could have been feeling significantly low in their mood for 2 years. So we need to know how long it's been going on for, first of all. The second thing is the severity of the difficulty they are experiencing. So there is a difference between feeling slightly uncomfortable and severely anxious. So how would we phrase it for the young person in question? How severe is the problem for them? Thirdly, we look at the impact. So what impact is this having on the young person and their life? Have they stopped doing their hobbies? Are they finding it difficult to maintain friendships? Or actually maybe it's having no impact on them at all and they feel like things are going completely fine. We need to know these things and understand exactly the specific impact it's having on the young person for the time in question. Fourth thing they'll look at is complexity. So is there some other factors that are going on here? Is it just that the young person purely feels low in mood? Or have we got low mood combined with some anxiety? Perhaps there's some traits of obsessive compulsive disorder as well. What are the different factors that are interplaying here? Is there some suicidal ideation? Is there some self-harm ongoing? And maybe has the family dynamic completely changed and that's affecting how the young person's feeling? And finally, the context. So some behaviours are normal reactions to situations. For example, feeling grief when we lose a loved one or a pet. These are normal responses for us to feel. But if the emotional response is not what we would consider to be a typical response to the situation, then that adds to the context of the emotion. Now, if it feels like it's more of a disorder and you've kind of covered these 5 things, and again, like I said, we will cover these again in webinar 4, you may need an onward referral to another professional.
Okay, so next we're going to be looking at some common mental health difficulties. We're going to be looking at stress, anger, self-esteem, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, low mood, and eating difficulties. To a degree, stress is normal, especially at certain times, such as if you've got an upcoming exam or maybe increased workload. And it's actually quite functional in short bursts. However, when stress is prolonged and when it's above and beyond our normal capacity, it actually becomes a bit of a problem. This is when we might become a bit overwhelmed and lose the ability to problem solve for our situations. This may be when we become a bit avoidant, and we might use avoidance to try and block out that feeling of stress. People, when overly stressed, can be at risk of becoming anxious or even depressed. Children and young people need to learn about stress and that it's actually quite normal. It can be positive for us and actually improve our performance in some cases. But when it becomes a bit too much, that's when it's a problem. And we need to improve children's understanding and tolerance of stress. Sometimes people can use the term stress as a blanket term for someone that is showing stress. But it may be that if this is investigated further, there may be a different mental health problem that is actually present. Professionals should consider this and not try to label a problem too quickly as just stress, as it could be possible that it's something else underlying this. Okay, now we're going to look at stress in terms of its relationship between pressure and performance. And we like to think of this as a bit of a bell curve. So if you take low performance and low stress means boredom. As this begins to rise, as you can see in the diagram, and there is more pressure on us up to the moderate level, and our performance actually starts to increase and we can operate at what we call our comfort level. As this continues further, our performance increases as the pressure on us increases, and we notice that we can actually operate at our optimum performance. So a little bit of stress is actually better in improving our performance. And this is what we call our ideal zone. So for example, take a student that's got an upcoming exam. That little bit of pressure will encourage them to maybe go home and revise, which will thus increase their performance. If we keep going, however, what we start to notice is we start to get into that strain zone, and this is when the pressure starts to get into the high level and then the performance starts to drop as a result. And this is what we call the zone of delusion. And then it keeps dropping until we get to that zone of burnout. And this is when the pressure is so high that the performance drops as a result. And what we're aiming for is in that optimal zone, which is when there's a healthy amount of pressure and a healthy amount of stress, so that the person can perform at a good level without burnout and without boredom. Okay, so now we're going to look at the signs and symptoms of stress, and here we're going to use 4 areas, and those 4 areas are our thoughts, our emotions or feelings, our physical sensations, and our behaviour. And you'll notice that there's lots of arrows, and this is because they all influence one another. So our thoughts influence our emotions, they influence our physical feelings and behaviours, our behaviours influence our thoughts, emotions, and they just all interact. So if we start with our thoughts, if we have thoughts such as, I feel overwhelmed, I'm struggling to do this, I won't get this finished, or I might as well just give up now. Those sorts of thoughts will create emotions, and it's key to remember that emotions and feelings are very different to thoughts. Those feelings might be feelings of stress, irritability, anxiety, and also a feeling of being overwhelmed. This can lead to physical sensations of feeling tense and also an increased heart rate. And as a result of all those different things, we end up with a behaviour. And the behaviours can be, we have a change in eating habits, we might avoid really important tasks such as, I really need to get that task done, but I'm just too stressed to do it. And also we might go the other way and we end up overworking ourselves, and this is where we just do too much and we push ourselves too much. So now this leads us on nicely to how to support someone who is struggling with stress. Well, first and foremost, we can give them some coping skills. We can help them to learn to be more mindful. We can help them to be better at problem solving. We might also give them some breathing skills, some organisation skills. We might even ask questions so that we can find the cause, because finding the cause alone can be really effective in being able to problem solve what we're going to do about that. What's the solution? We might also practice relaxation, because stress can put us a bit on edge. So to relax can help give you 5 minutes away from that stressor. And also encouraging healthy behaviours. So with anything that causes a stress, it's a demand. What we need to do is put some resources in place. That's our coping strategies. We need to get some really healthy behaviours in there to help release some of that stress and get rid of it.
So let's move on to take a look at anger. Now, anger is a completely normal emotion and is generally not a problem unless it is displayed in excess or in situations where it would not be a typical response to what's going on. It is frequently a behavioural response that is the problem and is often linked to aggression. And although they are linked, they are not synonymous. Anger can be instrumental and serve a purpose. For example, throwing a tantrum to get your own way. And actually it can be used to get a desired behaviour or get a desired response or reward by young people. Anger only becomes a problem when a young person or adult struggles to keep it under control and it is causing significant harm to other people. Anger is actually one of our core emotions and is something that we can't completely get rid of. It is there to keep us safe as part of our fight, flight and freeze response. However, when we are struggling to keep this under control, when a young person is having maybe physical outbursts or their verbal aggression becomes too much and puts other people in harm's way or puts the individual in harm's way, then it becomes more of a problem that we need to start having a look at and helping them to manage. The assertiveness triangle was created by Harris in 1967 and is a great way to show us how assertive, aggressive and passive behaviours all interlink and play together within relationships. Now, the ideal would be to be assertive in all the relationships that we experience. However, this is not always the case, and sometimes we can slip into aggressive or passive behaviours depending on the situation that we find ourselves in. When we experience an influx of anger due to feelings of threat or feeling of danger, it's really easy to slip straight into aggressive behaviours, as that helps us keep safe and helps us put our needs ahead of anyone else's. And in this context, our needs would be our life, our safety, and we're acting from a gut reaction perspective. So it's a very primal response to act from an aggressive nature. When we're acting from an aggressive stance, our self-awareness completely diminishes, and young people and adults who are acting from this way will not necessarily be able to control their responses. They'll also struggle to engage in any form of higher level thinking or higher level activity. And this can take some time to come back and for the aggression to reduce again. It's therefore really important to try and spot the signs early with young people so that we can put some strategies into place so that they don't slip into these aggressive behaviours and can stay in the more assertive and controlled area of the triangle. When we're looking at passive behaviours, this is where someone will become more of a people pleaser. They will go along with what everyone else is doing and completely neglect their own rights, and will just follow what everyone else is doing because it feels easier. Both passive and aggressive behaviours, we are acting from gut reaction. It's a gut instinct reaction, so we don't have much control over it. Whereas if we can try and keep young people in the upper half of the triangle, that's where control comes in and where we are more assertive and able to explain our rights, but also taking into consideration the needs of other people in the situation. So helping young people to identify these three areas can really help them to start to understand when they get aggressive, and if they start to lose control, they understand why they're losing control. And it's also important to understand as adults that when young people get to that point, they will really struggle to engage in any kind of thinking or behaviour that we may want them to engage in. So in order to understand anger a little bit better, let's take another look at a 5-area model. Now, it doesn't matter what the situation is in this respect, we're just using this as an example to try and unpick some of the thoughts, emotions, behaviours and physical sensations that a young person might have when they're feeling angry. An example of some thoughts that a young person might have is, "This isn't fair, I'm not enjoying this," or "Why can't I do what I want?" This can increase their experience of anger and also bring about feelings of overwhelm, irritability, rage and annoyance. Now, because anger comes as a result of the fight, flight and freeze response, adrenaline is playing a part in this as well. So when adrenaline is rushing through the body, young people can be feeling all sorts of different physical sensations going on. This can include breathing faster, having an increased heart rate, turning red, getting butterflies in the stomach, or even starting to tense their muscles in a way to prepare for fighting or running away, as this is the innate response that we have in order to keep ourselves safe. And all these three things can lead to behaviours that visually tell you that they are getting angry. They might start shouting and swearing across the classroom or wherever it is that they find themselves at that time. They could become violent and destructive, so they may start to display physical signs of anger. They might get destructive towards property. There could be some initial behaviours of self-harm present, and they might start to take their anger out on themselves. They might start pacing, and this would help to reduce the muscle tension. So all of this coming together can give you a good understanding, and the young person, of what's going on with them, why they're feeling the anger they're feeling, and where we can start to intervene to try and help them reduce this. When a young person is becoming angry or frustrated, our default response can be unhelpful in these situations. We might initially try to reason with the young person and try to talk to them about what's going on and try to explain why their behaviour is not beneficial to the situation, why it isn't okay for them to be acting in the way that they are. We then might try to relate to them and help to understand them a little bit more and help understand why they're feeling how they're feeling. And finally, we might try and regulate them. So we've realised at this point, perhaps we need to do something just to try and help them feel a little bit calmer. However, we actually need to do the complete reverse. We need to regulate, then relate, and then reason. And this is a concept that was initially brought about by Dr. Bruce Perry, and it's the 3 R's model. This works because when the human brain experiences anger, the high level thinking parts of the brain that control communication and logical thinking disengage. So actually we cannot engage in this at all. And nothing anyone is going to do is going to help that until we've helped bring these connections back together. The first thing we must do as adults is regulate the child, and we need to co-regulate with them. So the introduction of some breathing exercises and some mindfulness done together as adult and child can help regulate their emotional response and reduce the physical sensations of anger that they're experiencing. This might include going for a walk and talking through some breathing exercises or some grounding exercises. It's really important to not let the child do this alone. Now, giving them space can be helpful as well, and giving them that time away, making sure they're safe, and then completing regulation exercises can work. But the child needs to see that as an adult, you're willing to do the regulation exercises as well, And actually it demonstrates that one, someone knows how to do them, and two, they know they can come and ask you if they get stuck again in the future. It also helps to build trust that the regulation activity works, and having something demonstrated to us helps it sink in a little bit more rather than being told to go away and read a piece of paper, because if the higher level thinking part of the brain isn't connected, trying to read something won't be very helpful, but having someone talk you through it and do it with you is much easier. The second step is to relate to the young person, as we've discussed. So understanding how they are feeling. How does that feel for you? I'm getting that you're feeling angry. Can you tell me a little bit about how that feels? What you're thinking? This is where the 5-area model can come into play to try and help out. But we need to demonstrate to the young person that we understand them, that we understand their feelings, and that we are validating exactly why they're feeling like they are doing. And if we're not sure on how they're feeling, asking questions. Finally, we'll be looking at reasoning with the child, so engaging in a reflective conversation so that we can discuss the behaviours that were displayed and explain why the behaviours perhaps weren't acceptable within the setting they were in, but also reflecting on the emotion that was felt and perhaps problem solving so that if the situation comes up again, the young person's got a plan for what they can do next time. It's important when supporting someone with their anger to follow the 3 R's principles from Dr. Bruce Perry, but sometimes it's really helpful to give a young person space to breathe. Sometimes when a young person's angry, anything that we as adults say can actually make the situation worse, because like we've said, their conversational skills and their language part of their brain isn't operating at its full capacity. So actually it can be helpful to help the young person find a safe space to go and calm down. You as an adult checking that they're safe and that they're doing okay, but actually giving them space to have some time just to naturally calm themselves down. It's also helpful to teach the young person about recognising their early warning signs so that they know when they're starting to feel angry, what am I starting to think, what am I feeling, and what am I starting to do, so that they can implement some strategies earlier to help reduce any feelings of anger. Children and young people sometimes need to actually physically release their anger, so giving them some safe outlets for this physical release can be really beneficial. It might be that they need to punch a pillow, or rip up some tiny bits of paper, or throw ice cubes at the floor so that they can physically release the tension that's building in their bodies. As we mentioned, this is a primal response, and the adrenaline that's coming through makes us want to tense our muscles and fight or physically do something. They might want to go for a walk, or maybe they need to create conversations around anger in their daily lives so that they can physically discuss the stressors and therefore reduce the impact it's having on them. And finally, as we've already mentioned, regulation. Why does this work? Well, the human brain cannot function in 2 opposite states at the same time. So for example, we cannot feel calm and rage at the same time because they're 2 opposite emotions, thinking back to the feelings wheel from webinar 1. Therefore, anger, which increases our breathing rate, and we try to slow our breathing with regulation exercises, thus inducing feelings of calm, we cannot be breathing fast and breathing slow at the same time. We can only feel one or the other. Therefore, if we concentrate on breathing and regulation activities to help evoke feelings of calmness and relaxation, it helps to eliminate any feelings of anger for young people. But it's really important to encourage young people to practice these when they're in a state of calm, so that when they do get angry, it's habitual and they're able to easily call upon the skills as needed.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about anxiety. This is what we feel when we're worried, tense, or afraid. It might be particularly about things that are about to happen or may happen in the future. Anxiety is a natural human response and is very normal. It happens when we perceive that we are under threat, and it can be experienced through our thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations. And anxiety, like anger and stress, it stems from the fight, flight, freeze response. And there is also something we call the biological response, and this is where we have a certain trigger for our anxiety. And this leads to a perceived threat, and then we have the anxiety response, and then we have the successful coping reaction, and then it resolves anxiety. So in terms of this biological response, an example might be If a car was coming towards you and your fight, flight, freeze kicked in, you perceive the threat of I'm going to be hit by this car. You have the anxiety response of your heart rate increases, you feel tense, you get all this adrenaline, and the successful coping reaction is you jump out the way. And this protects you from getting hit by a car. And this resolves your anxiety and also keeps you alive. Exactly what it's supposed to do. Okay, so now we're going to look at the atypical response of anxiety. So this is when it's not so helpful. So we start with the trigger. So let's take an example of you going to a very busy supermarket. The trigger is it's very busy, you don't know many people, and then the perceived threat is they might judge me, I might get lost, I might even kidnapped. So then we lead to the exaggerated response, and this is avoidance in general terms. It's where we just think, okay, I'm just not going to go here today, I'm going to avoid it, I'm going to sit in the car or go back home. But this is seen as a coping strategy, but an unhelpful one at that, because what happens is next time you want to go shopping and it's busy, you think, I'm going to go back to the car and avoid it again. So it's unhelpful. This leads to unresolved anxiety, because every time you're in that situation, the same thing is triggered again and again. And then as a result, the anxiety continues, it's maintained, and it remains active. Avoidance is very unhealthy for us. It's not a good coping strategy, but this is an atypical response. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at some different types of anxiety, because anxiety does come in lots of different presentations. The first one we'll look at is separation anxiety disorder. Then we'll look at generalised anxiety disorder. Then we'll look at phobias, panic disorder, post-traumatic disorder, also known as PTSD, and obsessive compulsive disorder, also known as OCD. Okay, so starting with separation anxiety. This can actually be a very normal part of a childhood development, and it becomes a problem when a child or a young person is worried about not having close proximity to their parent or primary caregiver. This can result in school refusals, which we might see a lot of, and also this tends to happen more if the parent is ill. We might also find that if there's domestic violence or a period of transition upcoming, that separation anxiety can get worse too. And people can often maintain the anxiety by allowing the child to avoid separation. So, for example, if we allow the child to stay off school or go home with a parent, this is a maintaining factor. So we're actually encouraging the anxiety in this situation. So for generalised anxiety disorder, the main feature of this is worry. And this is things such as, what if this is going to happen? What if that is going to happen? And these can be both hypothetical things that will never happen, but also practical things that are general worries, something to actually worry about. And we tend to have two types of worry. So we've got type 1 worry, which is worrying about external daily events that often relate to feared current or future events. And as soon as one anxious thought is resolved, another one may appear about a totally different issue. And then we've got type 2 worries, which is where we worry about things that could be either negative or positive beliefs. An example might be for a negative belief that this worry is causing me to feel unwell. Whereas for a positive belief, it might be that this worry serves some sort of function, such as, if I worry, this will keep me and my family safe. So now we're going to take a look at phobias. Phobias are characterised by an extreme or irrational fear to an object or situation. So we're going to take a look at three types of phobia. Firstly, specific phobia. This is a specific fear to a single object or situation, such as a fear of birds or a fear of flying. Then we have social phobia, which has a focus on our social interactions, and is characterised by the fear of being negatively judged or scrutinised, such as going to a party and feeling like if you say the wrong thing, everyone's going to laugh at you, so you might decide that is too scary to go. Agoraphobia. Despite the popular myth that this is purely the fear of outdoors, this is determined by the distance of perceived safety as well as the proximity of the fear stimuli. So another type of anxiety we're going to look at is panic disorder. Now, panic disorder is characterised by persistent and unexpected panic attacks and the fear of having future attacks. This causes a shift in our behaviour to prevent the attacks from occurring again. Panic disorder is defined by at least 1 month of persistent fear about panic attacks reoccurring following an attack, or their effects. An attack involves the sudden appearance of intense fear or discomfort, plus at least 4 of the following symptoms, which I'll let you read on to find out more. Another type of anxiety disorder we're going to look at is post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD for short. And this is a disorder that develops in some people who have experienced a shocking, scary, or dangerous event. And it is natural to feel afraid during and after a traumatic situation. Fear triggers many split-second changes in the body to help defend against danger or to avoid it. This fight or flight response is a typical reaction meant to protect a person from harm. Nearly everyone will experience a range of reactions after trauma, yet most people recover from initial symptoms naturally. Those who continue to experience problems may be diagnosed with PTSD. People who have PTSD may feel stressed or frightened, even when they are not in danger. Post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms may start within 1 month of a traumatic event, but sometimes symptoms may not appear until years later. These symptoms cause significant problems in social or work situations, and also in relationships. They can even interfere with your ability to go about normal everyday life. Now we're going to have a look at anxiety signs and symptoms, focusing on our thoughts, emotions, behaviours and physical sensations and how these link together. So starting with our thoughts, we might get things popping up in our heads such as, I need to escape, where's the exit? What if they laugh at me? They don't like me, I can tell. And this is going to end really badly. Notice that these are all really negative thoughts. And if you can see the arrows on screen, we can see that this directly can link to our emotions too. And this might trigger things such as anxiety, anger, worry, unease, and feeling nervous. Again, just taking a look at those arrows, we can see that from emotions, this can also link to our behaviours. And these certain emotions might trigger behaviours such as change to our eating and sleeping habits, avoidance and isolation, fidgeting, substance misuse, or maybe even aggression. Again, this links to our physical sensations and our physical body. We might notice that we begin to breathe faster, our heart rate increases, our muscles might start to cramp, we might feel sick, and we also might get an increased need to go to the toilet. And it doesn't mean that it has to always go in this direction. It can also begin with our physical sensations and then influence our thoughts and behaviours, and they can all go either way. So now we're going to look at how we can support someone that might be struggling with anxiety. So we're going to begin with looking at how to promote understanding. Now in CBT, this is what we call psychoeducation. So it's helping that young person or child to understand what's happening in their brains and their bodies. And this is quite empowering for them. So this is a very common CBT technique, and it's about helping them to know why they're experiencing what they're experiencing. For example, my heart rate is increasing because I'm perceiving something bad is going to happen right now. And as a result, they know when to put in place those strategies that they may have learned through CBT, such as deep breathing, relaxation. Then we've got behaviour strategies. So an example will be graded exposure. So when we are anxious about something, we tend to avoid it. So through behaviour strategies, we teach them to face those anxieties. For example, I'm scared to go into my classroom because it's so busy and so loud. Well, rather than maintaining it and avoiding it more and more and more, which makes you more and more anxious, what we do is we create small steps, so that the young person can expose themselves to that situation, so that they realise that they can actually cope and they can manage. So it might be that they go into their classroom for an hour when it's quiet, and then they go into the classroom for another hour when it's a little bit busier. And then maybe they'll do half a day in the classroom, and we just up it slowly. And the brain can realise that actually there's nothing to be scared of in this situation. Then we've got normalisation, which is very effective because anxiety is very normal. And teaching that to young people makes them realise that I'm very normal too. I don't have nothing to be scared of right now. I have an exam coming up and I'm nervous and I'm stressed and I'm anxious, but actually that's quite normal. I'm no different to anyone else. And it's quite empowering for them to know that. And then we've got breathing and mindfulness. So this is a way of switching off the fight, flight, freeze and just toning everything down a little bit. So taking a deep breath just makes our parasympathetic nervous system activated. We get that relaxation response, and also just being able to separate our thoughts and physical sensations a little bit from the situation we're in, and just relaxing the body, because we're a bit like a car. Sometimes we can have our foot on the throttle a lot, and that leads to excess mileage, needing to replace damaged parts. And what we need to do is put the brake on so that we aren't burning out fuel. We're not having to replace all those parts that we're wearing out too fast. And that is about the breathing and mindfulness.
Obsessive compulsive disorder is characterised by repeated and unwanted obsessional thoughts, which can be images and pictures, combined with the presence of compulsive acts or behaviours, which can be internal or external, that reduce the anxiety presented by the thoughts. The thoughts and images do not come from external sources, but from the individual's own mind. Frequently, the individual is aware that these thoughts are not rational, and many of them are not true, but they still cause a significant amount of distress for them. This is where the compulsions take over, and the individual implements acts or behaviours in order to try and reduce the anxiety coming from the thoughts. Also, the mind tells them that if they complete these activities, the thoughts will not come true. However, the compulsion itself can cause distress and not be pleasurable, but it has the sole purpose of temporarily reducing the anxiety for the individual, despite the fact that in the long term it will maintain the cycle of anxiety. This is because the mind fuses together the idea that the unwanted thought was presented and the compulsive behaviour was completed, that reduced the anxiety, and the mind fuses it to create the idea that the only reason the anxiety disappeared and the thought did not come true was because the behaviour was completed. The individual then feels compelled to complete the behaviour every time the thought or idea presents itself again. Different people with OCD suffer with different obsessional thoughts, and these come in the form of distressing images, distressing thoughts, distressing pictures, or unwanted and repetitive ideas that cause anxiety. It frequently involves danger and dirt and harm, and these are some things we will talk about a little bit later on. Every area that OCD covers is different for each young person that you might be working with. The reason the obsessions cause distress is because they are the polar opposite to what the individual actually believes or the morals that they hold. And when it comes to thinking these thoughts, it puts them in great distress because the thoughts make them believe that what they are thinking is true, which therefore makes them a bad person or dirty, or makes them think that those thoughts are true. It can also make the young person think that they're increasing the likelihood of such events happening and coming true just by having the thought. And this places a heightened sense of responsibility on the young person, further adding to the distress and anxiety. The first one is thought-action fusion. This simply means I'm having this thought, therefore it must come true. If I think it, it will or it did happen. The second category is inflated responsibility. For example, if I pass on my germs, they will become ill and they will die. The third one is doubting consciousness. Did I turn off the gas? Did I remember to lock the front door? And the fourth one is symmetry concern. So this has to look perfect. Everything needs to be just so. To avoid the negative thought coming true, many young people engage in rituals or behaviours that they believe will stop this happening. These are what we call compulsions. Despite knowing that these have no link to preventing the event from coming true, young people engage in them just in case. So just to alleviate that little bit of anxiety that they might come true. This helps to reduce the short-term anxiety that the individual is feeling and give them brief respite from this emotion. Common compulsions include checking things repeatedly, acting in a particular way, ordering things, counting, hand washing, tapping, praying, and even trying to replace the thoughts with a thought that they feel is more beneficial. As we've already touched on, there are some common areas that OCD falls into, especially with young people. The first example is germs. This is probably one that a lot of people have heard of previously. An individual obsesses about contracting an illness or passing this on to someone else. This therefore leads to a compulsion that they need to wash their hands or stay away from crowded places to avoid becoming or spreading any illnesses. OCD can also present in a religious sense, and the individual suffers from severe and repeated religious doubts or an innate fear that they might get blasphemous thoughts. There is a fixation on morality and a strong belief that punishment or praise can come from a divine being or deity. Health anxiety and health OCD present in a fear and repeated thoughts that an individual is going to become unwell and contract an illness. Could also be that they're going to suffer from permanent suffering, either physically or mentally, and therefore not be available for their loved ones in the future. Sex frequently presents itself as a common area within OCD, and it can come in two different ways. The first is that when an individual is engaging in a sexual activity, they can become flooded with thoughts that they are dirty, which can therefore reduce the enjoyment and mean that the individual avoids any kind of sexual activity altogether. The second is the presence of sexually obsessive thoughts. Some of the common obsessions are an extreme fear that the individual is attracted to family members, animals, dead or inanimate objects, or things that they feel that socially they should not be attracted to, and that differ from that they are attracted to. It can also come from an intense fear of committing a sexually heinous act. There can be an extreme fear of becoming violent during sex. And there can also be intrusive thoughts and images about undesirables, such as animals or children. This leads to thought-action fusion of, I'm thinking this, therefore it's going to happen, and therefore individuals avoid sex altogether. Perfectionism within OCD comes from an extreme fear of making mistakes and a desire for everything to be perfect or just so. In order to relieve the obsession, it creates a compulsion of continually redoing things to ensure that a mistake hasn't been made. Accidents can also be a common theme within OCD, and this is where the individual has repeated thoughts that they're going to be involved in an accident, such as falling from a great height where this isn't possible. It can also be that they think about someone else being involved in an accident, such as someone breaking their arm, and that this is going to come true unless they complete a compulsive. Different to sex itself, we also have sexuality presenting itself as a common theme within OCD. This presents as an unshakable thought that the individual has a different sexuality to the one that they most identify with. This can cause distress as it does not align with their values. For example, a female who identifies as straight may have intrusive thoughts of getting intimate and having relationships with other women. Likewise, an individual who identifies as gay may have intrusive and vivid thoughts about engaging in opposite-sex relations. And finally, harm presents itself as a common area within OCD, and this can be that someone is going to be put in harm's way by the individual themselves. For example, an individual might have intrusive thoughts about having a car crash or breaking someone's arm. This can be distressing as it can evoke further thoughts internally that the individual then questions whether they're safe to be around people or whether they're going to actually act upon these things. And if they have thought this thought of, I'm going to hurt you, am I going to go and do it? Do I need to do it? Does this mean it's going to come? So how can we support someone who is struggling with OCD? The first thing is to be patient and remain non-judgmental throughout any conversations you have with the individual so that you fully understand what the obsessional thoughts and the compulsive behaviours are that they need to complete. Secondly, be inquisitive and ask questions. So again, furthering your understanding as to what it is that they are struggling with, and so you can understand how their OCD affects them personally. And it's really important to listen to exactly what they're saying, and if you don't quite understand, clarify with further questions. You could try to find ways to reduce the compulsions together. So if the young person has some ideas as to what they'd like to do in order to try and prevent the compulsion from taking place, try and find ways to do this together. So is there somewhere they can go when they're feeling like they need to complete a certain behaviour? Is it that you could say, it's fine, the door is locked, I have checked, we have done it together, let's go. You can provide psychoeducation around the normalisation of intrusive thoughts and obsessional thoughts, and reassure them that what we think is not the same as what we do, and actually that we are not our thoughts. Therefore, just because we are having this thought, it doesn't mean it's going to come true or reflect anything about who we are as a person. And if you're still concerned, then you can support the young person and then make onwards referrals to get more specialist support and interventions to help them manage and reduce the unwanted obsessional thoughts and compulsions. So let's move on to take a look at low mood and depression and what we mean by the two terms. So low mood is a very normal emotion for all of us to feel, whether young person or adult. It can last for a few days or a few weeks and generally includes feelings of sadness, tiredness, annoyance, lethargy, and maybe even some anger and frustration. Or the individual might not be able to say how they feel at all, and they might just report feeling nothing. And that's part of our normal emotional cycle and something that will go up and down and fluctuate for each individual in all different circumstances and situations. Relentless low mood, so when the individual is unable to lift their own mood and bounce back to a sense of vitality and enjoyment of life, can start to form into what we would classify as depression. Depression is a low mood that lasts for several weeks or several months, and the individual struggles to see a way to get out of this, and they may start to lack a sense of hope for their future. In addition, they might report not enjoying life, they might have a lack of interest in doing any hobbies, they will find no activities that they have to complete pleasurable, they might have stopped engaging with social contacts. Whilst this is just a short list of symptoms and by no means an exhaustive list of what someone with depression might be experiencing, it's a good starting point to help them understand whether their sleeping habits have changed, eating habits, or their exercise and social contacts, and kind of looking at what they're doing and whether that's changed for them recently. So we'll take a look at another 5-area model to help us understand low mood a little bit more and to have a look at some of the thoughts and behaviours that young people might report doing, or some of the physical sensations they might tell you they're having. So let's take a look at some of the thoughts that young people might report to you when they are starting to feel low in mood. They might be thinking, what's the point? I can't be bothered, no one likes me, I don't want to be here anymore, or they might even think that no one can help. This then leads to emotions and might include sadness, worthlessness, irritability, and helplessness and hopelessness. So in terms of the physical symptoms of low mood, some of them you might initially think are behaviours, but actually they are uncontrollable responses that happen when we feel low in mood. Young people might report tiredness, crying, headaches, stomach aches, or even a lack of any symptoms. So they might report feeling absolutely nothing and really struggling to make connections with different parts of their body, because that can come from the detachment from their physical state and their emotional state, and also their lack of wanting to engage with any form of external or internal stimuli. And finally, the behaviours. So we've already touched on a change to eating habits and sleeping habits, so that's a really key one to look out for in young people. They might have no interest in activities at all, social isolation, and just a complete lack of doing anything. So the young person might sit in their bedroom at home, scrolling through their phone, not really talking to anyone. At school, they might be disengaging with their favourite lessons. They might not be talking to people as much as they used to. So these are just a few of the things to look out for, and it can be really helpful to understand low mood from a young person's perspective by using the 5-area model. Even if initially they struggle to fill it in, what they're not saying can also speak volumes as well. So how do we support someone who is struggling with low mood and help them to boost their own mood again? The first thing we can try is something called activity scheduling. Now this is where we create a plan with the young person of different activities that they can do during the week to help boost their sense of achievement, closeness to others and enjoyment at various points across the week, because a lot of young people, when they're feeling low in mood, will have stopped doing at least one type of activity within those three areas, whether that be they're not doing activities that make them feel like they've achieved something, they might stop being close to people, and they might stop doing things they just enjoy. So by planning in different activities, it gives the young person a schedule that they can follow. And if they can follow that schedule, they can then report back on which activities made them feel better and which made them feel worse. And then we just increase more and more of the ones that make them feel better. Now, it's really important to remember that some activities can make us feel different on different days, and that is completely normal. So it's about reassuring the young person that that is okay to not enjoy everything every single day, and perhaps we need to have a different mix of activities that they can try so that when they are feeling low in mood, kind of in the future, or to help still pull them out of this low mood, they've got a different bank of activities that they can try and go to and try all sorts of different things. Another way to help young people is to teach them problem-solving skills, which can be used for a variety of emotional well-being and mental health difficulties. But in terms of low mood, it can be really helpful if their low mood is caused by a specific problem they are stuck with or a specific situation that they find themselves in. Once we help them to identify different solutions to the problem and weigh up the pros and cons of each solution, they can then pick the best solution and plan that in as to how they're best going to solve the problem that they're facing, thus hopefully improving their mood if the environmental factor was one of the biggest causes for why they are feeling low in mood. Not only this, but it links to the previous point of helping them have a sense of achievement, because they'll have achieved something if they overcome that problem. And even if they don't, they've achieved something by thinking of ways to resolve the problem that might work in the future. Something else that can be really helpful in helping to boost someone's mood and helping them to find ways to improve how they feel about themselves is to introduce psychoeducation around sleep, diet and exercise. Now, these three things are considered as the three pillars of mental health and emotional well-being. So in order for us to feel positive about ourselves and to feel resilient and emotionally regulated, we need to have these three things in good standing order first. It can be really helpful to provide some sleep hygiene information to young people so that they can create a routine for being able to get to sleep better and having the perfect environment so they can stay asleep, and also creating that routine so that they don't sleep in on weekends, which can make us feel worse than we actually expect. Providing them information around their diets, so really asking them questions about what are they actually eating in a day, and are they eating regularly? Have they stopped eating? And if they have, how can we introduce some foods that they would like to enjoy again? But also looking at exactly what it is they're eating. So are they living off crisps and chocolate all week, or are they getting a variety of different nutrients from different sources? And in terms of exercise, are they doing the government's recommended daily amount of exercise for young people every single day? And if not, how can we find ways to increase this? So maybe it's looking at they go for an hour-long walk after school. If we can get all three things in good order, they'll start to feel better about themselves. And finally, we can help young people to increase their resilience by giving them different resilience building skills and helping them to find ways to bounce back from any problems that they find happening within their lives so that this doesn't negatively impact on their mood. Now, what we're not saying is that resilience is a fix-all solution, but young people do need a certain baseline of resilience in order to help them navigate life and to get through different situations that they find themselves faced with. Now, Compass Go have a level 1 training which talks about resilience and how to increase this. So if you haven't yet accessed this, it might be worth finding out how you can access this within your working environment. However, there are loads of resources online for how to baseline a child's resilience, how to improve resilience, and different ideas on whole class, group, and individual one-to-one basis to give them some skills on how to improve their resilience and what as adults we can do to support them moving forward so that this doesn't continue to impact on their mood. Low self-esteem is not classed as a mental health difficulty in its own right, but it can lead to mental health problems further down the line if it is not supported early enough. Low self-esteem stems from a gap between an individual's self-image and their ideal self. Now, the larger this gap is, the lower an individual's self-esteem will be, as they feel they are further away from their ideal self. This can cause a lack of confidence and hypercritical thoughts for the individual, which then makes them believe even further that they have a lower sense of self and self-worth. For example, a child may wish to be on stage in Billy Elliot as one of the ballet dancers going on tour, but they feel that they have 2 left feet and actually they can't even keep time to music. Therefore, there is a large gap between their ideal self and their current self-image, which can therefore lower their self-esteem as a whole. Low self-esteem can also occur from relationship difficulties, social concerns, or difficulties in childhood, which is when we first receive messages from parents and society and understand what this means about us as a person. There are several factors that can impact upon an individual's self-esteem. Now, this list is not exhaustive, but there's some things that might come in handy when considering a young person's self-esteem. It could include difficult family relationships, poor academic achievement, social media, comparison to others, a difficulty in parental affection demonstrated towards the individual, friendship development and peer acceptance, difficulty in the home environment, bullying, and puberty. It's important to explore how these factors impact a young person and to what extent they do. Like we say, it's not an exhaustive list and this will differ for all young people, so it's important to understand the factors that are in play for them. Self-esteem can also be mapped onto a 5-area model, which can be really helpful in understanding how self-esteem presents for that individual and the difficulties they are facing. Examples of thoughts that someone with lower self-esteem might have include: I'm not as good as my friends. This work isn't good enough. I'm ugly. I don't like myself. I wish I could change. This can lead to all sorts of emotions for young people, and they could include sadness, guilt, shame, anxiety, and even lead to anger. And again, we get the physical sensations occurring for them, which can include numbness, shaking, crying, and they can even make themselves physically smaller to try and avoid being noticed. So they might appear quite hunched in their presentation. And this can lead to various behaviours, so they might start to become socially withdrawn. There might be changes to their physical appearances. There could be a lack of assertiveness skills. There might be constant comparison to others and a lot of approval seeking. So again, it's really important to try and explore this with young people. 5-area model, great tool to try and help with that. There are several activities you can do to try and help improve a young person's self-esteem, and some different ideas for engaging with groups or on a one-to-one basis. In your booklet is a copy of A Shield of Strengths. This activity encourages young people to identify what makes them unique, what makes them them, what are their strengths that they can play on, that they know make them a really good person. Another activity you might try is encouraging compliments, so that young people feel appreciated and they understand what it feels like to give a compliment and receive one. Now, a great idea if you're doing this in a classroom is to give each child an envelope and get them to write their name on the front, get them to decorate it. And then every time you blow a whistle or play a specific sound, they're going to pass the envelope to the person on their left. That pupil is then going to write down something nice about the person whose envelope they've got and pop it inside. Then you'll repeat the activity until the child's envelope has passed around the whole table or the whole classroom and back to the individual whose envelope it is. So by the end, each child should have an envelope with their name on, full of compliments and nice things to read about themselves from the rest of the class. We can also teach them assertiveness skills. So young people who have lower self-esteem struggle to say no and will quite often say yes to things that actually they don't want to do. So it can be really helpful to try and teach ways of saying no without saying no, or how to remain assertive without getting aggressive. We could also encourage positive relationships, so looking for ways to explore what makes a good friend, or giving people a chance to talk to people they don't normally talk to, and actually learning about each other and finding time to understand what makes another person different to me and how can we work together on this. So really trying to promote positive friendships and relationships both with adults and between peers. We can also help them to identify and challenge any negative beliefs that they have about themselves. So once these beliefs have been identified, we can look for evidence for and against the same thought. Often these beliefs are just opinions that we have of ourselves that we've taken as fact, Whereas when we complete this activity, we're encouraging young people to try and find actual facts that support the thought and actual facts that go against the thought. And therefore what we tend to find is that we have more facts that go against the thought, which can then help to reduce the amount we believe that critical thought. And finally, creating opportunities for success for all young people. So giving each child a chance to excel in something that they're good at. Going back to the shield of strengths, what are they good at? Okay, let's try and find ways to incorporate this into their daily lives so that they feel like they've got a chance to succeed at something. Now, it's no good just having art running every day for all children, because those that don't currently feel like their self-image means that they are good at art, they're going to feel like they can't succeed, and it's going to maintain that gap between their self-image and their ideal self. So we need to have a variety of activities that play to each individual's strengths where possible.
So moving on to eating problems. Eating concerns and problems refer to a vast range of eating patterns that fall and operate on a continuum. It can range from selective eating to eating disorders. Although this can be a mental health problem or disorder in its own right, eating difficulties can be a presentation of other underlying mental health concerns. Restricting or increasing eating can be due to various reasons, such as the presentation of anxiety, low mood or depression, autistic spectrum disorder, and for behavioural reasons, such as seeking to be in control. According to the DSM-5, there are 7 clinically diagnosable eating disorders: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, other specified feeding or eating disorder, also known as OFSED for short, avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID for short, pica, and rumination disorder. Avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder, known as ARFID, was a new addition to the DSM-5 in 2013. It classifies and defines ARFID as an eating or feeding disturbance, e.g. apparent lack of interest in eating or food, avoidance based on the sensory characteristics of food, or concern about aversive consequences of eating, as manifested by persistent failure to meet appropriate nutritional and/or energy needs. ARFID is different to other restrictive eating disorders in that it isn't affected by a person's beliefs about the size and shape of their body. Someone with ARFID doesn't restrict their food intake for the specific purpose of losing weight, and ARFID doesn't feature some of the other behaviours that can be associated with anorexia, bulimia, or other specified feeding or eating disorder, such as overexercising. The difference between a picky eater and a child with ARFID is that a picky eater won't starve themselves to death. A child with ARFID will. So here's some advice on how to support young people that may be experiencing some eating problems. So firstly, keep conversations neutral. Avoid discussing food or weight specifically when talking to young people. If they are talking about struggling with their eating, remain calm and non-judgmental, and take time to listen fully to what they are saying without distractions. Avoid giving them advice or criticising them, as this can actually break trust. Keep structure. Try to keep as much structure and predictability as possible around food times. This can help ease some of the anxiety that young people may be feeling, especially in school and eating with peers. Boost self-esteem. Help them find ways to improve their self-esteem. This can sometimes help if the individual is feeling that their eating habits are a result of not liking themselves or the way that they look. Be mindful of your own limitations. And finally, refer to a specialist. Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and OFSED require specialist input and treatment. Making referral to Young Minds Matter should be completed as soon as possible by the adult the young person has spoken to first. Young Minds Matter will assess for eating disorders and provide young people with such disorders with behavioural strategies and interventions to help. There is also a great organisation called BEAT, Eating Disorders Charity. BEAT offer a helpline called Youthline, which can be accessed easily 365 days a year from 12 till 8 p.m. on weekdays and 4 to 8 p.m. on weekends and bank holidays.
Self-harm and suicidal ideation frequently present alongside mental health difficulties. Self-harm is actually a symptom of a mental health difficulty rather than a problem that needs to be fixed in its own right. Self-harm can present in all sorts of different ways for different young people and can include cutting, burning, hair pulling, smoking, drug taking, and many other different forms of risk-taking behaviour. Many professionals don't feel fully equipped to have conversations about self-harm and suicidal ideation and feel that by talking about these topics, it's going to encourage young people to do these things. Actually, that's not true, and by talking about self-harm, we are not actively encouraging self-harm. But what it will do is it will give those young people who are struggling with self-harm a chance to feel heard and listened to, and a chance to say, yeah, actually, I'm struggling with that. Can I have some help? It's important to use active listening and validation skills when talking about self-harm and suicidal ideation to young people so that they understand that you are listening to them and hearing them for what they're actually saying. Now, these are skills that we cover in Webinar 5 in more detail as part of the therapeutic skills section. The National Self-Harm Network has a massive list of distractions that you can give to young people and talk through with them to help them find an alternative to self-harm that's safer but gives very similar sensations. Now, not all these distractions will work for all young people, but it's worth having a chat with the young person about what they think might work and actually trying things out and supporting them to use that rather than the self-harm method they're currently using. It's also really important to provide them with basic first aid information so that they can keep any wounds and harm they've done to themselves free from infection, because this will help to prevent further injury and further harm being caused. Now, there are loads of different websites where you can get basic first aid information from, but providing basic cleaning advice and sterilisation advice can be really helpful so that the young person doesn't do some more permanent damage. We can also use the 5-area model again to help understand what's going on for the young person when the urges to self-harm or the suicidal ideation thoughts present themselves. This can help them to break the cycle of self-harm so they feel more able to implement some new and safer behaviours. If someone's displaying an intention to end their life and they are vocalising that they frequently have thoughts of suicide, you can use a keep safe plan with them to help them know what to do when this happens. Now, keep safe plans frequently talk about who can help me, what I can do to help myself, and some external services that are also available to them. When young people are in this state of distress, it's really difficult to remember the things that we need to do in order to keep ourselves safe and well in daily life. Therefore, by having them written down in a list of people who they can go and talk to, it makes it much easier for the young person to know what to do. If a young person is at immediate risk, Young Minds Matters crisis team can be contacted, as can the single point of access on 01472 256 256, which is option 3 for a mental health emergency response. And that means that you have some people that you can talk to, and the young person can also access that number as well. If you would like some more information on self-harm and suicidal ideation, you can access further training from Young Minds Matter by going to their website or get in touch with Compass Go and we'll see how we can help. It's important to remember that all these common mental health difficulties can present differently for young people and adults, dependent on age, life experience, and background and home environment. So using the 5 areas, as we have done going through this webinar, can be a really helpful way to understand more about the young person and what it feels like for them at this moment in time. You can also use any of the activities we've talked through and all the ones that are in your workbook so that you can further support young people to help recognise any mental health difficulties they're struggling with. But it's really important to remember that if you feel like you can't support a young person any further and you feel like you need some more targeted and specialist support, then do make an onwards referral.